Here we go. Here we go. We're live. Hey guys, how you doing? It's Bruce here, Traveling with Bruce. How is everyone doing out there today? Welcome to Traveling with Bruce from Calgary, Alberta in Canada, a whole other country. It's nice to have you by to see me today. Hope you had a great weekend, and I'm really excited about today's show. I'm really excited. I have been looking forward to this now for about 4 or 5 days, ever since I was able to get my guests to say yes. I'll be more than happy to have you be on your show, folks. I'm going to have Jim Walker with us here in just a minute, spending some time with us today. And if you've got any questions about the cruise law news, how cruise lines do things, what their lawyers do and whatnot, anything like that, we're going to talk cruise law news today, and I think we're going to have some fun. I'm just double checking my big ass iPad, and yes, we are on the air, and folks are coming in. If you've never been here before, let me introduce myself to you. I'm Bruce with Traveling with Bruce from, generally speaking, Creston, British Columbia, but tonight from Calgary, Alberta. I love talking about cruise ships, cruise ship holidays, everything to do with cruising. And a whole bunch of my viewers join me every Monday night, and we hang out for about an hour or so. We talk about cruise ships, the newest news, the latest tragedies, rumors, what's happening out there. And a lot of folks join this channel who have questions about going on a cruise. If you've never been on a cruise before, this channel is for you. If you've been on a bunch of cruises, this channel's for you too. A lot of folks here are hanging out every Monday night, and we compare notes as to what's going on out there. So if you're looking on going on your first cruise and you want to get some info on what's going on, join us here. If you have any questions, fire away. I'll be more than happy to try to answer them for you. Say hi to me. Tell me where you're watching us from. And if you have any questions for Jim Walker, by all means, fire them up, and I'll do my best to get to them as we go through the show. Without any further ado, let me bring Jim into the telecast here, and let's see if I've got this right. There he is, Jim Walker. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Bruce. How you doing?
Good, buddy. Good. Thank you for joining me here on Traveling with Bruce. I've been following you on your Cruise Law News site, and always enjoy the updates you put on there. And a number of my viewers, I know for a fact, follow you as well. You also have a Facebook page, I believe. Do you do any other social media other than that?
I have a modest YouTube page, and I'm on Twitter on a regular basis.
Right.
So, of course, I have my blog, Cruise Law News, and that's my social media.
Right on, sir. When did you start Cruise Law News? When did you start doing that?
I started it in September of 2009, so it's been around for about 10 years now.
Yeah.
It started off modestly. I just wanted to write about some issues that I saw in the cruise industry. One of the things I don't do, Bruce, and I never have, is cruise. That's one thing, but I don't blog about my own cases. So if I'm involved in a case, I, of course, don't go on any social media and blog about it, but I like to give my commentary about the things that I see. So, so it's been about 10 years. I've written around, 300 blogs a year. I've written 3,000 or 4,000 articles, and I've met a lot of people in the process and developed a lot of friends and a fair amount of enemies, quite frankly. So it's all been pretty good.
Well, it's it's the way it is. That's the business, I guess, and the friends are the best part about it all. Of course, get to know some pretty cool people out there. I find the same thing with this channel. I started this 2 years, 4 months ago, and do a video about something that's happening out there, and some of the people agree with you, some of them don't, and it's just the way it is. I have a good friend of mine who says to me, I cannot believe how thick your skin is. You just let people scream at you the way they type at you. And I just go, what can I say? We're entitled to our opinion, and we're allowed to disagree or agree. Whatever happens. That's the way it is.
Right.
Fantastic, sir. And as far as the Facebook page, did you start that a few years later?
Oh, I can't remember when I started Facebook, but it's been about 5 years now. And that the Facebook page has really taken off because I've got around 245,000 people who follow me and it becomes friends on my page. And about half of those people are crew members. So a big part of our practice is not only representing passengers, but representing crew members. And of course, most of the crew members use Facebook to communicate with their family and their friends. And I find a lot of crew members have lots and lots of ongoing questions about their work and things that they face. So it's been about 5 years on Facebook, I think.
Right on. Good following for sure. Well, it's a great platform because people can direct message you. They can communicate with themselves on the page, and they can access at any time, 24/7. I mean, things have changed so much in our lifetimes. This social media thing is just unbelievable. I never thought I'd be a YouTuber really until about 3 years ago. I mean, I had no idea I would even be doing anything like this. But imagining something like this when I was in my 20s or 30s, no, nothing like this existed.
Yeah. Well, my kids tell me I've got to get on Instagram. They explain to me, Dad, no one goes on Facebook. You've got to have an Instagram account.
Yeah.
I actually have one. I just started it. Not many people follow it, and I'm really kind of struggling with that. It doesn't come naturally to me, and you got to load it up on your iPhone. Rather than using a desktop, so I find it awkward to navigate that.
Yeah, I hear you there. I have an Instagram account as well, but I used to use it on my laptop, but then there were some changes made, and apparently you can still do it, but you have to do it in a different way. And I'm so old school that once I learn something one way, I don't want to change. I just don't change the rules on me. Leave me do it the same every time. And my daughter is just prolific on these things, but then she's got the 30-year gap on me, so that's how it goes.
Yep, I mean, it's exactly that same situation. I've got two kids, two boys, who are 22 and 25. That comes naturally to them, and it just seems like a struggle to try to learn it.
Yeah, I hear you. I had no idea when I started my channel that I would have to have and would have a Facebook group page. I'd be Twittering and then trying to figure out Instagram on top of that. I didn't think that I would be, doing all of this stuff, and yet I had to, because if you're going to be a YouTuber with any kind of reach, you've got to get out there, and it's like a fisherman. The wider the net, the more fish you might catch, and so
yeah. Before I had Cruise Law News, I had a website called Cruise Law. And that was pre-Google. So this is, I think it was pre-Google. It was I started in around 1998.
Right.
So it had all the old search engines and such. And so about the time I decided to no longer be a defense lawyer. So my story is I started out when I got out of law school defending large corporations and insurance companies and large manufacturers of airplanes and such, and I also did work representing the cruise lines. And so about the time I switched to the plaintiff side, I decided not to advertise at all. So I didn't have a billboard, I didn't have a yellow page, I didn't have any TV ads or anything like that. I just started what was in essence a blog.
Right.
Cruise Law, and so I did that, and it was largely successful. I've kind of I still have the Cruise Law page, but it's not really active, and I just started this Cruise Law News blog, which has really taken off. So yeah, the internet has really changed the way we practice, and certainly the way we advertise. We don't advertise except writing about cruise-related issues.
Yeah, and really, a lot of people are finding you, which is another difference. It's amazing stuff. Yeah, I got my first computer in 1993, so things have changed considerably. And I was old in '93 as far as having a computer. Because my daughter was at that time, oh, Dad, you know how to turn this thing on? For a while,
Right.
come a long way. Well, so let's talk about that. You came out of law school. You started on the corporate side of things, and you were defending cruise lines at one point. Were you ever employed by a cruise line directly?
No, I was never employed by a cruise line. No. So I started representing cruise lines, defending them in, let's see, I moved, I got out of law school. I went to law school at Tulane, which is in New Orleans. I was in New Orleans for about 4 years as a defense attorney, again, doing maritime work, but essentially representing not cruise related work, offshore industry work, oil and gas, corporate type of work. I came to Miami in 1987, passed the Florida bar, and again worked for a company that did insurance related work, and we represented large corporations. A couple of years later, I began defending cruise lines. So you might be familiar with some of these lines that are no longer in existence. I represented Dolphin Cruise Lines.
Right.
I represented Premier Cruise Line and represented Majesty Cruise Line. Right. And so their ships were the Big Red Boat. Some people may remember that.
Disney.
The Big Red Boat was a Disney Premier partnership that operated that cruise ship.
Right.
It was really the official cruise ship of Disney, which later came into Disney Cruises, of course.
Right.
And then the other cruise ships were the Sea Breeze, the Ocean Breeze, the Dolphin 4, and then Majesty Cruise Line had one ship called the Majesty, and they later sold it to NCL. It became the Norwegian Majesty, and then they sold it to the European market. But I started out doing defense work. I represented the cruise lines and tried cases filed by passengers and by crew members. And so I did that until about 1998. So I did that more or less for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then I switched sides rather dramatically. I decided one day that I wasn't going to represent a corporation or a cruise line again. I had a successful defense practice, but I just felt like my calling was to represent people and to pursue their causes and air their grievances. And so I notified the underwriters in the cruise lines that I was no longer going to do their work. Yeah. And I literally sent them a list of all the cases that I had. I was representing them, and I boxed up my files and I shipped it back to them. And the next day I opened up a practice and began my cruise law website, proclaiming that I was representing passengers and crew members. Now, the fact of the matter is I didn't have a single passenger or crew member that I was representing at the time. But, you know, it was a decision that I made. And at the time, I didn't have any kids. And so I just kind of gambled with my practice, and I did really what I always wanted to do. And so that was kind of the start of my beginning of representing passengers.
Yeah, well, if you have a passion for it, it's not as hard work. If you're representing one side and your heart isn't in it, then it's real work. May not be enjoyable either, but if it's what you really want to do, you don't need as much motivation to get up and get on it every day.
Oh, no. I absolutely love what I'm doing. And I live 2 miles from my office. I love coming to work in the morning. I love writing about the cruise industry. Right on. I love engaging with people on social media. A big part of my practice is every single day I get 4 or 5 people wanting to talk about a legal issue pertaining to the cruise. Either a crew member is having an employment dispute or a passenger is dissatisfied with their experience.
Right.
We represent relatively few people that contact us. We're involved on the passenger side only in cases involving a serious personal injury or wrongful death. We also have represented over the past 10 or 15 years around 100 passengers, typically women or children, who have been sexually assaulted or sexually abused during the cruises. So that's a big part of our practice.
Right.
And that's essentially what we're doing. I have a very small law firm. I practice with my spouse, with my wife, who I met 41 years ago when she was a high school student, and I was just starting out going to college. And then we were college friends for a number of years. And then she went to law school. I went to law school. And I recruited her to join my little firm, which consisted of me. And, she was is a lot smarter than me. So she was a natural fit. And she was really, I think, the only attorney who I could really trust with my practice, quite frankly.
Right.
And she's, she is, the one thing she said is, I will be a member of your firm, but I never, ever want to be on the internet. So you will find no photographs anywhere of my spouse. You will not see her ever on my web pages at all. She doesn't like social media. I think she just opened up her own personal Facebook account because my kids urged her to do that.
Right.
So she's kind of a silent partner in the scheme of our practice.
Right on. So you married up.
My father always said it's a poor man who can't marry above himself. So, I married. I did okay as far as the marriage front. So we've been together for a long time, and we're both here every day. She also likes our practice and likes what we're doing. Yep. And she comes from a medical family. Her dad is a doctor. Her brother is a doctor. She's got another sister who is a dentist. So she loves medical related cases, and she's very good with that. So that's a big part of our practice. Right on.
My better half, she also doesn't want to be on camera at all. And the mystery is, everyone wants to know on YouTube, what does she look like? And I always tell everybody that my wife looks exactly like Jennifer Aniston. She just
there you go.
For Jennifer Aniston. So if you want to know what she looks like, look at Jennifer Aniston. You go,
that's right. Bruce, I think I've heard your wife in the background, if I'm not mistaken, but that might be your daughter.
Usually my wife. Yeah, it would be my wife in the background.
All right.
She's the one correcting me on my language skills, how to spell, how to talk. Again, I married up. That was easy for me. From way down here, no problem at all.
Right.
So yeah, it was great. We worked together a number of years as well during our working years, which is a rarity amongst my friends and family. But my wife and I, same thing. We're together almost all the time, and wouldn't have it any other way. Just love it. Fantastic.
That's right.
Getting older, and we're doing our thing. Yep. So in the cruise business, I guess I was thinking of some questions to ask you today that I had in mind, and I wanted to get your take on it, whether you can answer these questions or not. I had done a video the other day about a couple that had gone on a celebrity cruise, and they're from Canada in this particular case. They flew to Vancouver to do an Alaska cruise, and they were on the ship for 4 days, and the wife got the fever, and they went down to the medical center, and the doctor on board kept her overnight in the medical area there, gave her some intravenous and what have you to help control her fever. The next day they were in Juneau, and the doctor strongly recommended that they go to the hospital there and they get some tests done to see what's going on. They departed the ship, went to the hospital, and after about 5-6 hours, the wife was feeling much better. She was feeling great, happy to go back to the ship. They went in a cab back to the vessel, and they wouldn't let them on. The doctor had declared her unfit to travel. And I'm just wondering, in the cruise business, the legal departments that these cruise lines have, is this sort of kind of a prevent, sort of a defense that they're going to put together, where they'll say to the doctor, look, if you've got a passenger that is suffering from an unknown issue, you know what the symptoms are, but you don't know what's causing it, and the passenger gets off the ship to a land-based medical center, is it sort of a playbook for cruise lines to automatically not allow the passengers back on?
Well, in that scenario, we're contacted on a regular basis with those basic facts, and inevitably, the cruise passenger doesn't have travel insurance, right? And that's where the problem comes in, because then they're faced with having to get back home, and they're incurring expenses and travel expenses and so forth and so on. And that's where the rub is. I don't really have any insight. When I was a defense attorney, the lawyers were not typically brought in at that point. Of course, whatever decisions the ship doctors were making, I believe at the time, and still kind of believe, that maybe they're making some mistakes or not, but I think that they're typically in good conscience making decisions that they think is best, not only for the passenger, but most importantly, the cruise ship.
Yeah.
So they don't want someone who is ill and can infect other people and so forth and so on coming back on the ship when they can use their best medical judgment and get them off the ship.
Yeah.
Now, abandoning people in ports of call, again, if they had insurance, it really wouldn't be much of an issue.
Yeah.
I mean, the real injustice, I think, takes place when the crew member's involved. When a crew member is abandoned, and now, unlike a passenger, a cruise ship has an ongoing obligation to any crew members, any ship employees, to provide medical treatment. They have a non-delegable obligation to provide adequate medical treatment to the point that the crew member reaches his or her maximum medical improvement. And so one of the things when we're representing a crew member, we see a lot of issues that arise in that special relationship. So crew members are entitled to special treatment. Our casebook, our law books tell us. And what we see is the crew members quite often being sent off the ship, and instead of coming, getting off in a U.S. port where they're seeing a U.S. board certified specialist, they're sent back to Jamaica or the Bahamas or Eastern Europe, Croatia, Serbia. Their benefits are quickly terminated and their medical treatment is suspended. And that's a large part of the practice that we have. So, I'm sympathetic to people who kind of get ushered off the ship. But, I think at this late date, I think cruise passengers have to know that they have to buy insurance. So it may sound I'm a little callous about it. I'm not particularly sympathetic when cruise passengers are put off in forward ports of call when they have some medical related problem. My sympathies and my interest really lie in the mistreatment of crew members, quite frankly.
Right on. Interesting. Got a question from one of my viewers, Adventures with Duncan. He's saying, hello, Jim Walker. Are you surprised at all the death cases? Are there more than we hear about? Thanks for being a guest on TWB. Are there more death cases than in the media that we hear about? Or
well, I think that there aren't many news accounts. We don't, and we certainly don't discuss it. We don't blog about it when there's a natural death. Just statistically, I don't know how many deaths occur. I've been asked that many times. I don't really have any source of accurate information. So, a certain dynamic of the cruise guests are of an age where they can die due to natural causes. There are, that being said, is you certainly don't want to have a heart attack on a cruise ship. These cruise ships are basically like walk-in clinics. Many of the cruise ships tout that they have advanced medical facilities and such. We've handled many cases where we were highly critical of both the skill or the lack of skill of the typically foreign trained doctors and the lack of adequate resources, where we've seen people die due to preventable situations where they just misdiagnosed them or provided contraindicated drugs, and they in contrast to your recent story about the people being ushered off the ship, we typically see the real malpractice is when the ship doctors don't get involved in the case and don't send them
right.
And so but as far as unreported deaths, I don't know, there's no reporting mechanism. This is one of the things that is happening with the cruise ships, is there's no federal agency, there's no requirement to report a death.
Right.
So the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act back in 2010 requires cruise ships or cruise lines to report only, quote, suspicious deaths.
Yeah.
So those are typically the source of people's complaints, and you see social media. A lot of people ask me on a regular basis, I heard this incident happen on the ship. The police came aboard. The cabin was seemed to be locked down. There was tape across the cabin. I think that someone was murdered. Well, sometimes those rumors just kind of run around unfounded, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, right on, sir. Janice was saying to us, talking about a family, once off the ship, couldn't get back on the ship. She said that happened to our family too. Very similar, but on Holland America and in Anchorage, person was cleared by the hospital but refused back on the ship. The rest of the family from other countries was still on the cruise. So yeah, they were left high and dry in Anchorage, unfortunately for them. But this is what happens. I can understand where a cruise line would want to limit their liability on a medical case. If someone is ill on board the ship and they get the wrong kind of medical care, the cruise line is on the hook potentially for a massive issue in a courthouse. And if they can, in effect, make the problem go away by shuffling the passenger off to a medical facility on shore, it's no longer their issue. But for the person left behind, it's that would be a bit tough.
Right.
I guess as far as cruise lines go, there's, and for the public, I guess cruise lines can pretty well hire, as far as can they hire kind of any medical professional they want to work on board these cruise ships, or are there standards for that?
Well, there's some loose standards. The cruise lines all tout that they follow the College of Emergency Physicians as far as their training. So there's no criteria that they have to hire a certain type of doctor.
Right.
But they're hiring people with emergency room background in general practitioners. But there's no real criteria requiring them to have a certain level of education. So, my comments about cruise ship doctors is they're a cruise ship doctor because they want to do something other than conventional medicine ashore. So, we've seen a number of circumstances where some of the doctors touting that they're doctors are not really accredited or not really doctors. We've seen about a half dozen cases like that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a scary situation. We've seen some situations where doctors said that they were doctors, but they had some, I guess, quasi-medical training. They were nurses. But you don't want to be on a cruise and see a ship doctor for any reason. You want to get off as soon as you can if it's appropriate.
Right.
And, the law pertaining to malpractice committed by the cruise ship doctors has really changed over the years. There's an attorney in my office that handled the Seminole case where for the first time our 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, so that's the Court of Appeal overseeing Florida, held that a cruise ship doctor can be held responsible as the ship doctor, so that the cruise line is vicariously liable when the passenger proves only that he thought that the doctor, who's characterized as an independent contractor, was employed by the cruise line. So you go on a cruise, you go to the ship infirmary, you see the ship doctor. They're an officer of the corporation, of the cruise line.
Right.
It's not particularly hard to establish that they're an agent of the cruise line. So that's been a big change, where the cruise line, upon a showing of this agency relationship, can be held responsible where there's medical malpractice by the ship doctor. Used to be you couldn't sue a cruise line doctor. Our courts would routinely dismiss any type of lawsuit that you'd file when someone was killed or severely injured due to bad shipboard medical treatment.
Yeah, interesting. Nurse Nancy is one of my viewers, and she said it has to be very difficult work to work in the medical area of a cruise ship, she's saying. I have another comment coming for you. Sheila says, I'm retired from Circuit Court. Jim, thank you for being here tonight. So you got fans. Masters Game is saying, how much medical insurance should one have when cruising? Any thoughts on that?
Well, you have to have medical insurance. I don't know what limits there are. I don't have any familiarity with insurance agency or agents. I don't know. You have to have a comprehensive policy that, first of all, covers medical expenses, and that includes being medevaced back to the United States. Right. That's a big issue. If you're lucky enough to be the recipient of the courtesy of the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard does just a fantastic job. They can fly out as far as 400 miles out to the oceans and pick up ill and injured passengers and fly them back to the U.S. Now, if you're on a European itinerary, Spain has a pretty good Coast Guard arrangement. France has a decent operation as well. But if you're way down in the Caribbean and you need to get back to the United States and you don't have medical coverage that includes a medevac via helicopter, you're looking at if a helicopter is available, if they can get down there, or if there's a medical evacuation via jet. It's going to cost you big bucks. It'll cost you $30,000 to $35,000, right, if you can afford it to get back to South Florida.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It can be really, really rough. You got to have medevac insurance for sure. It's an absolute must. Someone is asking me here, any idea why cruise lines stopped requiring passengers from filling out the health questionnaire? Do you have any?
What's the question again? Why did
the cruise lines stop requiring passengers from filling out the health questionnaire? I'm not sure.
Well, I know that at a time, most cruise lines had a health questionnaire that was really looking into preventing people with gastrointestinal symptoms boarding the ships. I didn't know that they stopped doing that. And so, the whole norovirus situation, I know that you recently had a YouTube episode on norovirus. I think that was that today? Was that yesterday?
Yeah, I did a video today about the Norwegian Joy.
Yeah, the Norwegian Joy. And so, we don't handle norovirus cases.
Right.
And so, there are a couple of reasons we don't handle those types of cases. I mean, every time you have a norovirus outbreak, assuming that's really what it is, and for example, the Norwegian Joy didn't involve a norovirus. So the CDC illness website came out and updated their information on the Joy, and they said that the etiology, the causative factor, was unknown.
Yeah.
And so, the CDC and the Food and Drug Administration tell us that the primary cause of norovirus is contaminated food and water.
Right.
And I believe that to be the case. And it can also be caused by infected food handlers. And of course, passengers can touch a contaminated surface.
Right.
And then there's also the dynamic that it can also be transmitted via airborne particles, which is
right.
kind of a nasty concept. So yes, you can have a passenger bring it on the ship, and I guess that's what the medical surveys were originally designed to try to flush out.
Yeah.
But how on earth can any attorney, as an advocate for their client, possibly prove, number one, that someone on the Norwegian Joy was infected by norovirus?
Right. And from where? No, we just got to.
And so, and so how are you going to prove that it came from contaminated food or water?
Yeah.
It's just a guess. Or how do you not know that a food handler was or it was not infected, and so forth, and so on? So it's almost impossible to prove. All cases against a cruise line have to be filed in federal district court. Right. Now these are serious, mostly conservative federal court judges. You have to literally make a federal court case out of it. And if you don't have sound science in your favor, if you don't have experts that are accepted by the court who have scientific opinions that can be tested by the court, you just can't come in and say, I felt well and I didn't eat at a port of call and I was perfectly healthy and now I've got all these symptoms. And the CDC didn't conclude that was norovirus, but I think it's norovirus.
Right.
You can't do that. You've got to have proof of a particular causative factor. You have to have proof that the cruise line, you have to prove that there was norovirus that sickened you on a cruise ship. That's the starting point. And then you have to prove that the cruise line was negligent in preventing that infection to take place. It's virtually impossible to prove. I have strong feelings about the issue of norovirus, and I do write about it quite often because it seems like the cruise lines are not in the business. They have very little concern with the cause of the norovirus, meaning they don't try to establish that it was due to contaminated food. They're never going to conduct a epidemiology analysis where they have determined that it was caused by a food handler in the galley contaminating the food, which sickened 200 people. It's not in their interest to do that, and our federal government makes no effort to do that as well. And so the primary concern, it seems to be getting the next round of passengers on the ship in a very short turnaround. And so, not to be graphic, but when you have 100 people on your ship puking and otherwise sending billions of molecules of norovirus out into the cruise ship environment, it's embedded in the fabric and the linen. It's in every nook and cranny in the bathrooms. The crew members are enlisted to try to scrub the ship clean. You've got the new passengers coming aboard. They're never, ever going to not sail their ship simply because there'll be a riot of several thousands of people who are unhappy that they're not starting their cruise.
Right.
That seems to be the real problem. Is there's this rush to get everyone off, to get the sick people off, to try to get the ship clean as you can, and then get the next round of passengers back on the ship. That seems to be the problem. Now, we're never ever going to handle a norovirus case. Fortunately, the symptoms only last 3 or 4 days, although some people have kind of lingering symptoms, it seems. But you're never going to prove one of those cases in a court of law. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And I would imagine also, Jim, that I remember a case, was about a year ago. I'm trying to remember if it was the Oasis of the Seas, a Royal Caribbean ship. They had an outbreak of norovirus. They had come out of, I believe, Miami or Fort Lauderdale, and they were in Falmouth, Jamaica, and the Jamaican authorities wouldn't let anyone off the ship. They had 100+ cases. They decided to leave Falmouth to go to Cozumel, and we're up to like 300 or 400 cases of this thing now. We're going right back to our home port. And they got back to the home port, I guess, 2 or so days later with 540 odd cases. And the cruise line came up with basically a compensation package where everyone got, in effect, a free cruise. This cruise is no charge. You get another one for nothing. And I'm thinking to myself, forget about doing any kind of a class action lawsuit. Even if you win, you're not going to get what they're giving you as it is. Take the deal they're giving you if you want to go on another cruise with these guys, because you're not going to do any better on your own.
Yeah, no, as far as that goes, you see the cruise lines, compared to the situation 25 years ago or 20 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, cruise lines were far less likely to offer full refunds and free cruises or any type of compensation. Mm-hmm. So as far as missed ports of call, those types of cases, we don't get involved in any commercial disputes like that. And we find typically that when there is some type of offer of compensation, most of the time it's not unfair, quite frankly.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously done out of the goodness of their heart, and to me it's a PR move. I mean, you got to do it. It's the smart thing to do on a PR move, and I have to give credit. I think it's usually I find Royal Caribbean is one of the better lines at being a little more proactive on one of these kinds of scenarios where, if there's an engine issue and there's delays, they'll immediately come up with an offer right away, where other lines are a little behind the ball. I noticed lately it's been Norwegian
cruise line,
definitely behind the 8 ball. They're the last guys to cough up any kind of a decent offer to the cruisers, and they just upset all the passengers on the ship. I don't know why they allow it to get to that point, where if you'd been up front like Royal Caribbean usually is, it seems to me to be, you're going to avoid all of these PR fiascos. But I don't know. Maybe it's the position.
Yeah, I mean, we're contacted on a regular basis on those types of situations, and we've had a number of people contact us on several of the last NCL cruises where I think they had a engine failure or semi-failure propulsion issues after a fire, and they missed a couple ports of call. But the passenger ticket is so one-sided. I mean, I look back when I was a defense attorney, and I used to help draft the terms and conditions of the Premier and Dolphin and Majesty cruise tickets. And, cruise passengers have this kind of naive notion that there's some rights that protect them. And cruise passengers, there are no rights. There are no rights that protect you whatsoever. It's all written by the defense attorneys for the cruise lines, and they contemplate every imaginable issue. So, missed ports of call, and maybe they'll give you $50 or $100, maybe not, but they can really do as they please. So, there's no chance of a lawsuit, much less a class action lawsuit. It's really a waste of time.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I used to be in the financial services business, and I remember when I was a branch manager of a stock brokerage firm. This is in the 80s and in the 90s. I noticed a pattern was happening more and more and more. It was called compliance, 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 and know your client and really protect the firm from liabilities. And it got to the point in the investment business that, I mean, you couldn't open the front door without checking with the lawyer first, whether you could do that or not. I mean, you wanted to institute any kind of a sales practice, you had to check with legals. It just went on and on and on. Then the paperwork got more and more onerous to open an account and to advise the clients of their rights and so on. Have you found that in the last 10 and 20 years, the cruise lines have become even more lawyered up, internally to really make sure the passengers' rights are, like as you described it, almost non-existent?
I tend to agree with that. I mean, what you've seen with a couple of cruise lines, like Royal Caribbean, for example. 12 years ago, believe this or not, you might not believe this, or anyone watching this may not believe it, but Royal Caribbean had no in-house attorneys involved in litigation matters. They had a tax attorney. They may have had some kind of HR, employment-related internal attorneys, but they had no attorneys representing their interest in kind of the common legal issues that came about. And in order to get the attention of Royal Caribbean, you literally had to sue them. And only once they were served with a summons and a complaint with lawsuit papers did they then go out and hire an outside attorney. So they had no internal attorneys.
Wow.
And so you would have to sue them. They were the most sued cruise line for no other reason than most attorneys who represented the passengers and crew members found that you couldn't talk to anybody unless you filed a lawsuit. And they would have to appoint an attorney. And once that attorney was involved, you could finally get someone to respond to you. It was really very, it was crazy. It was so that that was a scenario. Now they have a dozen in-house attorneys. Carnival has a full complement of at least a dozen or 15 in-house attorneys.
Yeah.
And so, the passengers would ride off to Royal Caribbean, and they would be met with an email response, if that, from someone in the customer claims department that had no authority to do anything at all. Even in the most egregious cases, most of the people who came to contacted us only because they were so frustrated with the way they were being treated by the lack of a response.
Wow.
It was like the cruise line, in particular Royal Caribbean and Celebrity, and Azamar, all those related brands, were really kind of chasing the clients to attorneys in my position. But they've gotten their act together, and they're definitely lawyered up now.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be done. It's a prevent thing. I mean, these companies now. I mean, I was trying this a few months ago. On behalf of my channel, I wanted to talk to someone. I had a fantasy about talking to someone in the cruise business about some aspect of the cruise business. And I thought, well, I'll just call the number of the company, and I'll ask the receptionist to send me to that department. And I was having trouble finding a phone number just for these outfits. I'm always trying to get information from the PR departments of cruise lines, because especially when they announce a new ship or a new feature or a ship being refurbished. Might want to get some more information about that. And I have no way to contact these people. There are no phone numbers. There are email addresses that go to some kind of server somewhere, and you get a generic robotic response. But to talk to an actual human being in these organizations, they don't have the authority to talk to anybody. I don't think they're allowed to take a call from the outside world and even venture a guess, let alone an opinion on what you think it is you think you want to know. It's almost like I got to talk to the legal department before I talk to you. There's no way I can say anything. I can only send you the press release that we issued out, and the press release is filled with so much legalese. Because the bottom half of the press release is all legalese. The top 2 paragraphs is what we want to talk about. The rest of it is we're not liable for anything we misrepresented in what we just talked about up here. It's just overkill on the lawyered up side of things, and it's a reflection, I guess, of what the world is like these days.
Right.
Makes you wonder. I don't know. Very interesting. Let me just take a look at some of my other questions for you. I did want to ask you about in-house lawyers, and you've covered that. Beautiful. Can you tell me, of all the years you've been doing this, whether you were on the ship side or the cruise line side or on your own, what is the craziest proposed lawsuit that someone has ever wanted to bring against a cruise line that just makes you shake your head?
Oh, when I was a defense attorney, we saw the full gamut. We had a case. We had a case of a woman suing Dolphin Cruise Line when she went on a cruise and claimed there weren't enough single men. And believe it or not, a couple of years later, we had a case that wasn't filed into suit, but was a complaint of a man who claimed that he went on the cruise and he couldn't find anyone to dance with. I mean, these are bizarre things that, I mean, you would think there would be something crazier than that.
Yeah.
But, a lot of people, a good portion of our practice, for worse or better, is people contacting us, and they clearly have no case, and they clearly have no understanding about the legal process, and they don't understand that it costs money to file a lawsuit, and you have to hire experts, and you have to meet a burden of proof, and
right.
so on. But I will say, we are contacted every single time I blog about something, and so
Wow.
you have to break down my opinion about how things should be in a perfect world.
Right.
And cruising is not perfect, of course. And so I have my criticisms. It doesn't mean that I'm advocating suing anybody. And this happens all the time when there's a missed port of call. We're contacted by someone who's unhappy about the cruise. Their cabin was too noisy. The air conditioner didn't work. The service was terrible. The food was terrible. The missed ports of call is a very big deal. And I sympathize with people who have saved up to go on a cruise, and they want to cruise to the Cayman Islands. They don't want to go to Nassau again.
Right.
And they end up, for whatever reason, due to the propulsion issues or some other reason, they can't make it down to the Caymans, so they end up in Nassau.
Right.
And people are really, really unhappy about that. And they get their friends and they're ready to go with a class action lawsuit. And we just tell them that there's no basis for that. The terms and conditions of the passenger ticket govern it, first of all.
Right.
If you filed a lawsuit like that, it's in federal court too. It's
Right.
going to be dismissed right away, and you're going to incur, we handle all cases on a contingency fee. So
Yeah.
we're not paid anything, and our costs are not reimbursed. There's no obligation to do that unless we're successful with a verdict or a settlement that the client approves.
Right.
And so we have to kind of talk them down out of the tree, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's probably the majority, believe it or not, that's probably the majority of the inquiries that we receive are cases that are not
Right.
cases.
Right.
And we have to dissuade people from filing suit, even when something goes terribly wrong. In this poop cruise, right, with the Carnival Triumph that had an engine room fire and the ship floated around in the Gulf of Mexico. We all know the case. I wrote an article similar to an article that I wrote following the Splendor engine room fire that also left the Splendor, the Carnival Splendor, if you recall,
Dead in
this
the
was
water.
back in 2010, floating off the coast of Mexico and had to
Yeah.
be towed back into port and all that kind of nonsense. In both of those situations, Carnival stepped up to the plate and they refunded the cruise fare, and they gave all the passengers another free cruise, and they gave them $500, and they waived all the expenses, the bar expenses, and so forth and so on.
Right.
All the passengers should take that.
Yeah.
And yet there were attorneys who represented passengers who advertised filing a class action lawsuit. Well, you know, if you have 2,000 people getting $500 each, and you can actually represent all 2,000 people and get the $500 that's being offered to each of them, you can get a gross recovery of $1 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the attorney fee would be 30 to 40%. You could make $300,000 or $400,000. I think it's absolutely unethical to do something like that.
Wow.
But you wouldn't believe how many attorneys are out there advocating people to sue cruise lines when there's no basis for the potential of a recovery whatsoever.
None.
And so in the poop cruise, the Carnival Triumph, it turned out around, I think, 25 or 30 people ended up filing suit. And their attorneys, they had 10 attorneys from Texas and a half dozen attorneys here in Miami. At the end of the day, those cases were all consolidated, and a federal court judge, Judge Graham, a very conservative judge, awarded a total of about $118,000 to those 30 people. And it turned out that they recovered an average of less than $4,000 each. So if you look at the costs that would have been incurred, that were incurred, and the attorney fees and their own expenses of coming here to give a deposition and a trial,
yeah,
it was a total loss. And
yeah,
you could see it coming a mile away.
Yeah, there was no hope.
No hope.
Got a comment here from Captain's Table, MDR, main dining room, I guess is what that means. Does the 1851 maritime law, value of a boat / seaworthy, also apply to cruise ships to protect them from paying any damages to families that occur on board?
Well, I think he's referring to a limitation of liability provision. And yes, if the ship is sunk or is otherwise lost, you can have a limitation of liability filed by a ship owner. So yes, that would apply. And fortunately, we haven't seen any sinkings of any major cruise ships resulting in deaths. Certainly in the last 10 years, 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, the last one was the Costa Concordia.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So there were so many kind of built-in limitations. The passengers, of course, unless they died, and there were some deaths, but there was more than average net worth of the Costa Concordia, even in the salvage value. And of course, they had virtually unlimited insurance.
Yeah.
And of course, the passengers had to go to Genoa to file a claim.
Right.
And they couldn't file suit here in the United States against either Costa or Carnival.
No.
So, the crew members made out really poorly too. In particular, at least the Carnival and Costa were at least offering all the passengers at least $14,000.
Yeah.
Which is kind of it's a small amount of money, but if you got off that ship with your life and just a bad story to tell, you can make an argument that $14,000 is certainly better than nothing.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. I've been talking now for a year plus about how the cruise lines are investing hundreds of millions of dollars into these private islands. And, I was trying to figure out with my viewers, why would they be doing that? And I've had horror stories sent to me where people said, well, got off the ship in Nassau or another place and got accosted or got hustled or, just heard of a friend of mine who got, beaten up, whatever it would be. And I can imagine that cruise lines, more and more are thinking to themselves, one way to limit our liability is to build our own private island getaway location where no one's going to be late getting back on the ship at 4 in the afternoon. No one's going to miss the ship. All the staff that are going to be looking after these people are going to be, contracted by the cruise line type of thing. There won't be any panhandlers on the beach because it's in a place where there is no, say, native population at all. All right, so great. Cruise lines are doing that. Royal Caribbean building, Coco Cay, $250 million type water park, and so on. And now Great Stirrup Cay is adding villas, and it's getting more and more complex as each year goes by. These cruise lines are outdoing themselves. Even MSC is building literally a full-blown island for themselves. Now I'm wondering, the question I'm wondering about is, all right, it's getting to the point where the cruise line will bring 4,000 to 5,000 passengers in for perhaps anywhere from, say, 6 to 12 hours in time, if it's just a daytime visit. And, people slip and fall and twist ankles and hurt themselves doing whatever. But what if you have a medical emergency on the private island that the cruise line is running, and you're 300 yards away from the cruise ship medical room, and a person needs medical services, right on the resort part of the, island? Are these cruise lines possibly setting themselves up for legal liability issues if something like that were to happen to someone on shore?
I think they may. I mean, you could have that scenario, but I think that at the end of the day, the cruise lines have made their calculations and have determined, kind of using liability as the model. So
Yeah.
the liability, and they've got a captive audience, so they can charge them $119 to get on the zip line. They can charge them whatever they want for the wave runners. They can charge them $18 for a Labadoozy alcoholic drink. They can make money hand over fist, and all that money is going right back on the ship, so to speak, and right back to the cruise line coffers in Miami. Cruise lines are in the business of making big bucks.
Yeah.
So they've got their business down to an art. I've said it many times. These are all foreign flag cruise ships. They're flagged in places like the Bahamas and in Panama, because those countries have very little interest in overseeing the cruise line operations. They don't care. They don't care when a crime occurs. There'll be no one from any of those countries coming out to a Miami-based cruise ship to conduct an investigation. And so I think they're primarily developing places like Half Moon Cay and Great Stirrup Cay and Coco Cay and whatever the MSC private island's called.
Yeah.
So they can just make tons and tons of money.
Right.
And, they also have the benefit of not dealing with crime. I mean, I've written and warned extensively about the crime problem in Nassau. I think it's a very real problem. Our State Department in the U.S. and Canadian, I don't think they call it the State Department, but whatever their foreign
Government Canada, sure. Yeah.
They warn about sexual assaults of cruise passengers by people operating the jet skis in Nassau. There's a real crime problem. We've represented people that were victims of crime ashore in the Bahamas. I say the Bahamas, just primarily in Nassau.
Yeah.
All the Bahamians take great offense when you talk about a crime problem in the Bahamas and you're not specifying Nassau.
Yeah.
The outer islands are pretty much crime-free.
Right.
They kind of don't like people from Miami that they perceive as a far more violent place than anywhere in the Bahamas, criticizing the crime problem in the Bahamas, like in the past. I understand all of that, but that being said, if you can have a captive audience in your own private destination that you carve out of a sovereign foreign land that's kind of subservient to you, that seems to be the way the cruise lines operate.
Yeah, I mean, Disney wants to open up their second island now, and Carnival's developing Grand Bahama just outside of Freeport. They've got virgin land that they're going to put literally their own piers, dock a couple of ships there, and have all the on-land services, and it's hundreds of millions per project, adding up into the billions of dollars that these cruise lines are sinking into places that are prone to hurricanes.
Well, yeah, that's right.
And yet they're not stopping. I can see where, like, I can understand the financial motivation of these major corporations, a number of which are traded right on the New York Stock Exchange, and are capitalized at 15 to 30 billion bucks a piece. These guys are under such pressure from the Wall Street backers that they have to make more money this quarter than they made last quarter, and they've got to come up with ways to limit their downside risk and upsize their payoff. And the last thing they want to do is drop off of 4,000 passengers so that they can go on shore and buy beer for $2 a beer over here at this guy's bar. When if you take them over to that island over there, 20 miles away, the beer is $8 a pop from us.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, the cruise lines are very skilled in maximizing the money each particular ship generates, and so they know that their casinos, if they fill the casinos, if they get everyone drinking, if you have the drink packages, if you have
specialty dining.
Yeah, I mean, you have the specialty restaurants, you have the gift shops. The cruise industry would file for bankruptcy if all they collected were cruise fares.
Oh, yeah.
They make literally billions and billions of dollars with their onboard purchases, and I'm not exaggerating. Every year, that's where they make their money. And if they can capture the money that otherwise would go to vendors ashore. Yeah, I mean, they're already making the majority of the profits from their shoreside excursions. So,
right.
A cruise line like Royal Caribbean and Celebrity, they have around 7,500 shore excursion operators that are running the buses and their shore excursions, and so they're capturing a big portion of that money
right
off the ship. So they might as well just take it all, is their thought process of having a private island.
Yeah, I see that. I know that Disney, their argument for operating a second facility, Lighthouse Point, I think they want to call it, was that Bahamians employed at Castaway Cay, or Castaway Key, however we pronounce it, were paid better on average than most average Bahamians in other businesses. And the Disney argument was, we run the island, Castaway Key. It's run in a world-class fashion. We control every aspect of the experience for the customer. It's safe. Mom and dad can come with their 6-year-old and 8-year-old kids and 12-year-old, not worry about ne'er-do-wells on the beaches. And the employees that we have there are vetted and are work for us for years and years and years, because they never quit these jobs. They don't want to quit these jobs because they're good paying jobs. And the government of the Bahamas has bought into this program. Whereas some of my viewers will say, yeah, but Bruce, the problem is, I remember when my mom and dad used to go on a cruise out of Miami, you would go to a foreign country in the Caribbean, and you would see the culture on land, and you'd experience maybe local artisans and what have you. And I'm going, yeah, that was 1975. That's true. But those decades have come and gone. Those places now are like a Nassau, for example, where you've got 350,000 people instead of 120,000 way back when. You got a lot of very hungry, desperate people trying to make a go of it, and selling a couple of trinkets on the beach just isn't going to cut it anymore. You got to make a living, and right. With cruise lines, they're just not interested. From what I can tell, they just don't seem to be interested in having their passengers get off a ship in downtown Nassau, walk 4 or 5 blocks into the heart of downtown Nassau and go down the wrong alley and run into all kinds of trouble and come back with purses missing and black eyes and whatever else. Better to take them to a private island place, and that's a thing you don't have to worry about.
Right. That's right.
Interesting. It's a unique. Well, it's a business like no other. I mean, it is a unique business. Of course, you and I are spending most of our time talking about the Caribbean cruise business, really. But we don't see private islands in the Mediterranean like we do in the Bahamas. In the Mediterranean, you still have the idea of getting off a cruise ship in Naples, getting on a bus and going to Pompeii or going to Herculaneum or to Mount Vesuvius and getting the so-called cultural tour. But as you were saying earlier, don't feel sorry for the cruise line. That $150 you're paying for that bus ride over to that place over there, the cruise line's making $75 profit on that $150 deal.
That's right.
And they don't have to maintain those ruins or anything like that.
Maintain the ruins, yeah.
Yeah, and I always love the one-liners or passengers always saying, how come the ruins are in such bad shape? I don't get it. Why can't they maintain those things? But Europe is a different place, and then of course there's Asia. What are your thoughts? I'll just throw this question out at you from left field. What are your thoughts about the China cruise market? Your overall thoughts on that?
I don't know if I have a concise thought about China. I think it's kind of a weird cruise environment, quite frankly. The Chinese people have a unique way of protesting when things go wrong during a cruise. I've never seen a group so well organized in making their complaints known. I think that's my only general observation. I don't really, we're never really contacted by anyone with a complaint about, I guess mostly because they're Chinese cruisers, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we've ever been contacted by anyone who's had any particular complaint about a cruise in or around China.
Yeah. The China thing I wonder about, I know that Royal Caribbean has sent in some serious assets into China. They've committed their 5th Oasis class ship to go into China. They've already got their one Quantum ship there now. Yet Carnival did an about turn. They decided, well, we're going to go into China, but we're going to do it as a partnership with a Chinese-based national company that is connected with the shipbuilding outfit, and we'll have them, do the bookings, and we'll coordinate the management of the ships themselves. We'll sort of partner up with them. That way, the Chinese government changes their mind overnight about a policy unlikely to affect us because we're dealing with a Chinese partner here, whereas Royal Caribbean is kind of on their own. And Norwegian is somewhere in the middle. They had the Norwegian Joy there, built it for $1 billion, sent it over there with great fanfare, and 8 months into its new neighborhood, they pulled it the hell out of there because they were bleeding red ink like crazy. And now they're bringing in their 20-year-old cruise ships that they refurbish, and they're putting them in instead. So they're taking out $1 billion asset and putting in a $150 million asset in its place to see if they can mop up any money there. And then we see all of the potential political liability between the U.S. and China with trade wars and tariff issues and who knows what. I'm thinking on the outside looking in, if I were to be an investor in one of these publicly traded companies called the cruise lines, I don't know if I'd want to hold shares in a company that in 1 minute could be told to get the hell out of here because, even though you're not, quote, an American company per se, your ships are flagged overseas, the crew is maybe a Mandarin crew, it might be Filipino, you're still perceived as an American kind of an entity because it's over the top entertainment, over the top size of these massive behemoth cruise ships. At any one time, they could be just told to leave, and there's no recourse. I mean, there's absolutely no recourse. The China market, I don't know how lucrative it can be for a foreign player versus a domestic player to make a buck over there. I can see, making the big American money over here on the Caribbean cruises and Alaska cruises.
Yeah. Well, I guess the cruise lines would argue that the Chinese cruise market is the fastest growing market and is expected to have the largest number of passengers. I don't really have any feel for those issues one way or the other. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, interesting. Well, the business is a unique business, to say the least. They can move their assets wherever they can make it work. They can avoid the weather. Got to give them credit for that. But on the other hand, you can have a mechanical issue that can render your vessel useless in a moment's notice. You don't know when the next generator is going to shut down on you, wherever you happen to be. I kind of wonder, when is the day coming that there's some serious weather happening and a cruise line all of a sudden finds itself dead in the water because of mechanical issues?
Yeah, well, we've had some close calls, certainly, with the Viking ship and with, there were some scares with the Royal Caribbean ships. I mean, they acted proactively by hiring the first meteorologist, right? And that's a step in the right direction. But, sailing into rough weather is kind of
Russian roulette.
It's a exceedingly dangerous thing. I mean, particularly with these new monster ships that Royal Caribbean is floating around in, Oasis of the Seas, Lure of the Seas, Symphony of the Seas. I mean, getting that many passengers safely off the ship into lifeboats is going to be a challenge. It's they do their lifeboat drills in beautiful weather in the Caribbean, but if you have a ship like that floundering off somewhere off
Cape Hatteras,
Australia, or in Europe, you can have a Costa Concordia situation develop really quickly, quite frankly. And I'm concerned that there aren't enough lifeboats. So the cruise lines are very careful in what they say. They say there's enough life craft. Well, life crafts also include rubber watercraft as opposed to a lifeboat. So you go down a chute into one of these rubber devices. That's nowhere to be in really rough weather.
Yeah.
So that could be a potential problem. But fortunately, we really haven't seen it as bad as it can be.
Yeah, I agree. Even the Costa Concordia disaster, that was a miracle at the end of it all, because the wind blew the ship to the shore, and the ship began to list onto its side, and luckily listed on literally a cliff, an underwater cliff above an 800-foot drop that it easily could have slid off of that cliff, gone down it. The fact only 32 people passed away is a miracle.
It is a miracle. No question about it. I mean, it was beautiful weather, relatively warm water, and people could swim to shore. They had to.
They had to, yeah, unbelievable. Whereas the Viking story, the Viking, I think it was the Sky last year, just off the coast of Norway. Most people do not understand the fact that that ship came within 300 feet of drifting into the rocks and being ripped apart like a tin can in some kind of a blender. I mean, that thing was, as fast as the captain was evacuating the passengers with the helicopters, they still only got something like half of the people off the ship after 24 hours of trying to get people off the ship. That's right. There was no way they could drop anyone in a lifeboat in that situation. There was no way that these lifeboats were going to capsize the minute you put them in the water.
Yeah, and the thing is, Bruce, most people don't realize that you couldn't have filed suit against Viking in a U.S. court for that. So you could have had be representing an American who who perished in that near disaster, and there'd be no way to hold the cruise line accountable here in the United States. So the form selection clause, right, in all cruise passenger tickets and the terms and conditions have what's called a form selection clause. So, if you're on a Carnival ship or Royal Caribbean Celebrity NCL, you have to file suit in federal district court here in Miami. If you're on a Princess Cruises, you have to go to California. Whole American Line, you have to go to
Seattle, I think.
Seattle, of course. But if you're on a Viking ship, they have a form selection clause in Switzerland.
Right.
So, what is the maritime law in Switzerland? I have no idea.
Yeah.
That's the point. So, again, the cruise lines have taken steps to protect themselves in virtually every situation.
Yeah. It's virtually impossible to really go after them that way. Yeah, fascinating business. Absolutely fascinating business. Got a comment here says, what do you think about the legal case of Carnival breaking environmental laws repeatedly? The substantial fines of 40 million and 20 million don't seem to be stopping them. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it is the most egregious. It's the latest and most egregious tale of the cruise industry, burning high sulfur content fossil fuels. The question you haven't asked me is, Jim, do you cruise? Do you and your family go on vacation on cruise ships? And I would not cruise, and it's no criticism of anyone who's a cruise fan or does cruise. My secretary, my office manager, and the attorneys in my office cruise and say they love it, but they don't say it real loudly around me. I think that Carnival has polluted the oceans, the air in the oceans, every way you can. I mean, they burn this high sulfur bunker fuel, which is the nastiest, most toxic fuel you can possibly burn. I mean, right. Bruce, you wouldn't burn it because you have a care and concern about your neighbors.
Right.
This is the cornerstone of the cruise industry.
Right.
And then they have these devices, right, that are called cheat devices,
scrubbers,
where they're trying to scrub the emissions of the stacks, and they're just turning the air pollution into water pollution by discharging this toxic water from the stack emissions into toxic sludge and dumping it all over the friggin' world.
Right.
I think it's outrageous. I mean, Carnival has been fined all their subsidiaries, Princess and All America Line, not only dumping oil and using these secret bypass valves, but by dumping plastics and fouling the air. They've been fined over $100 million in the past 30 years. And, people say, oh, you don't like Carnival. Well, no. All America Line and Princess and those subsidiaries are not only the ones doing it. Royal Caribbean, of course, in the late 80s and early 90s, was the poster child of environmental cruise pollution. They were fined, I think, a total of $29 million. And again, Norwegian Cruise Line was also fined millions of dollars.
Right.
But the thing about Carnival and Royal Caribbean earlier is they not only polluted, but they polluted for a long time. They polluted for decades. And when they got caught, they lied about it.
Yeah.
And, our practice permits us to speak directly with crew members. So one of the first things we do is when we first meet a crew member, we ask them for an explanation of everything they do in a typical day. And I can't tell you, 15 years ago, how many crew members would come to us and talk about their job duties. And then they would talk, well, twice a week, I'd have to go down to the trash room, down at the lower deck, and we would go into the trash room, and we would have all of this trash in these black plastic bags, and we would open up the crew doors, and we would be tethered in so no one would fall off the ship. And for 2 or 3 hours, twice a week, we would throw plastic garbage bags out into the oceans. And so we would hear it firsthand. And we still hear things from crew members about not only Carnival, but other cruise lines. MSC is a major polluter. And we don't hear as much anymore about either NCL or Royal Caribbean, but we receive not frequent, but I guess periodic complaints from crew members that talk about not only the oil and the plastics, but the air admission problems from the Carnival ships. So I hope that answered that question. I think it's the most serious problem in the cruise industry, quite frankly, and I think it is it's something that really I feel passionate about.
Yeah, I hear you there. It's I remember seeing an interview of the president of Carnival. He was on a financial show, and he was basically bragging about the fact that the Carnival cruise ship fleet could use the cheapest bunker fuel available because of their so-called scrubber systems. And he was trying to brag to the Wall Street crowd just how great a cruise line they're operating because of how little they pay for the fuel that they're using. And I'm sitting at home going, you got it all wrong. Your cruise line is so filthy and burning this garbage into the air. Your ships are banned from most European ports. People ask, well, how come Carnival doesn't go to the Mediterranean and go into all these different ports in the Mediterranean? They're not allowed into the Mediterranean with all the new standards that have been put in. These 20, 25-year-old cruise ships are basically only allowed to sail where they're sailing now, which is the third world type countries and the small Caribbean outfits, and then of course downtown Miami and over in Fort Lauderdale and Port Canaveral, they haven't put the emission rules in place where would ban these ships from even existing.
Yeah, and so the reader's question talked about the $60 million in the last 3 years in fines. Yeah. Mickey Arison, the chairman of Carnival, of course, is worth over $8 billion. Yeah. And so Carnival collects many billions of dollars a year. So a $40 million fine followed
chump
up.
Change.
It's chump change.
Nothing.
So, I make it a point of always going to court and watching the hearings, and the federal district court judge overseeing this, I think she just largely looks the other way, and she knows these fines are not going to be meaningful. She did kind of do a veiled threat in open court of talking about banning the Carnival ships from U.S. ports.
Yeah.
And or imprisoning cruise executives. But that was never going to happen.
Never.
It was just idle talk. And so,
no.
I'm very disappointed, quite frankly. I don't think Carnival is taking the steps it needs to take. It was ordered by the judge on petition from the U.S. government to deal with the problem of single-use plastic items on their ships.
Yeah.
And Carnival sold about 50 million single-use plastic bottles last year on their 26 or so ships.
Wow.
And that's a big part of their business of just selling everything they can, of course, on their ships. And so they have been ordered to reduce the use of single plastic items. Norwegian Cruise Line has promised to do so by the beginning of next year, of 2020.
Yeah.
Carnival has no plans of doing so. If you go on right now onto carnival.com and you look up plastic bottle or plastic water bottles, you will see them advertising for sale a dozen plastic bottles for $24 or $19 or whatever that profit margin
deal.
is.
Yeah.
And so, they're still advertising it. And they're just not making any steps. And this whole funny business with the scrubbers, which are just cheat devices, which are kind of an in-run around Carnival complying with the new IMO sulfur limits that are coming on in January of 2020. They're just saying you can do it a cheaper way. You invest in a scrubber. It's cheaper to invest in a scrubber and dump all the toxic sludge into the water than buying the more expensive low sulfur fuel. So
Right.
I don't think that they are really committed to improving their environmental practices.
No. Last point I'll bring up is I did a video a couple weeks ago about the $1.5 billion of building that's being done at the Port of Miami for the cruise sector. All the new terminals going in, and now they're putting in that railway line. They want to put that in there. But the one thing they aren't doing is putting in shore-to-ship power.
Right.
And I just put my hands up in the air and going, when is the right time to do something like that? And I'm thinking right when you build brand new terminals that are going to be standing there for the next 50 years, why don't you incorporate the ship-to-shore power right at the same moment, make it mandatory that all ships have to be able to handle this, so you can shut these engines off for the 6, 8, 12 hour, whatever many hours are going to be sitting there for, and just work off ship-to-shore. And nothing's been done in Fort Lauderdale or Port Canaveral, the three busiest ports, 3 of the 5 in the world. Nothing's being done, and you're just allowing these 25-year-old, 30-year-old cruise ships to get refurbished at the cost of 30, 40, 50 million bucks, but without having the ability to plug in on shore. And who owns who here? Who's running the show?
Yeah, well, the cruise lines are running that show. So the city commissioners were quoted in a Miami Herald news article saying, cruise lines never even brought it up. We never ever considered it.
Yeah.
Well, who's overseeing who? No one's overseeing the environmental practices of the ports, really, or the cruise ships.
No. And why would they bring it up? Arneson is going to bring it up. There's no point in bringing this up for him. It's just going to cost them more money. Why would I do that? That's crazy.
Right.
I did read in the LA Times the other day that there's an exemption in California. If you operate a cruise line, you can use the port of, say, Los Angeles 5 times a year without having to plug into shore power.
I read that.
They do have shore power there, but I've noticed. I was taking a look the other day at how many cruise lines are running cruise ships out of LA, and some of the cruise lines are conveniently only running 4 trips a year out of Los Angeles. Go figure. They won't do the 6th one. They'll go up to 5, but that'll be all, and then they'll move the ship somewhere else and not plug it in because it can't be plugged in.
Yeah. That's really disappointing. I remember seeing your YouTube show on that issue, and it was, quite frankly, the first time I had really thought about that particular problem is when I watched your show.
Yeah.
So it's just disappointing. You got to be positive about your life and what you do for a living, but it's a bummer, these issues, because the cruise industry can and should do better. It's a wealthy industry. It's a growing industry. They have tremendous tax benefits.
Yeah.
The workers work hard.
Yeah.
We've been to 5 or 6 congressional hearings on all types of cruise-related issues, and the cruise industry and the travel agents have always had people who say 95% of our customers say cruising is a great thing. And, I thought to myself, well, I don't dispute that. Most people when they have an opinion about the cruise industry, like to cruise.
Yeah.
Because it's a tremendous value. Now, I would argue, well, they have unlimited cheap labor. They have no taxes. They're
Right.
foreign flag, so forth and so on. But the bottom line is that they do provide a good profitable, lucrative business to offer to the American public and to Canadians and people from around the world, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have money that they can use to make their industry more respectful of the environment. So
I agree, Jim, and I would think that if you're Carnival, Norwegian, or Royal Caribbean, my attitude on it is, why aren't you guys leading the charge to go this direction to make it even more impossible for more competition to come at you? If you convert your ships now to ship-to-shore power capability, and all the ports that you visit all have mandatory laws saying you must, if you're a cruise ship, you must be able to plug into shore power. And these three brands have it. They can probably get a 10-year build-out time frame to make it work. You've just limited the potential of outside competition coming after you, because the cost of entry would be so prohibitive for an outsider, they wouldn't be able to afford the upfront cost. But because these cruise lines have figured out ways to operate on the cheap, with the cheapest fuel and the lowest labor and no taxation, you're opening yourself up to a world of competition. And so here's Richard Branson with his cruise line coming out now. You've got the hotel brand coming out, Ritz-Carlton coming out after you. You're going to have all these other players who are coming into this unregulated or very lightly regulated business because the cost of entry is so cheap.
right.
To me, I'm thinking, well, now that you own the business, why don't you shut the door behind you? Because that's how I would think as a mogul kind of a guy.
Right.
It would be fair to a new player, but for the environment, it would be a great thing. But there doesn't seem to be any single federal or country board or agency or entity that can control these guys and say, this is the deal. You play by these rules or you don't play here at all. And in the U.S., it's the wild, wild west.
So, yes, that's right. That's right.
Anything goes, I think. There you are. Well, I got to tell you, Jim, this has been, for me, highly enjoyable. I hope my viewers have enjoyed tonight's show, talking about these different issues in the cruise business. It's just never ending, always changing. And in some ways not changing at all, I guess, depending on what the issue is. But I want to thank you very much for being here tonight and being my guest. We've been going for an hour and 37 or so minutes on this already, and I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your life to spend.
It's been my pleasure, Bruce. I've started watching your show in the last couple of months, and it seems like your channel is growing, and I'm pleased to be here, and hopefully we can do it again.
I would love that. We'll stay on top of that. We'll definitely stay in touch with each other and keep an eye on what's going out there, because not a week goes by that another story comes out about something else in the cruise business. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And yep, I like to say to my viewers, I'm not a paid spokesman for anyone. I'm not paid by the insurance company to be here. I'm not paid by a cruise line to be here. I am just following the world out there as I see it, and some things are good, some things are bad, and I just try to put in my 2 bits worth of commentary in the middle of it all.
Now, you're a straight shooter, Bruce. Your show's very even keel. I hope I haven't taken your audience into a negative funk by being on. But if that's the way I took everybody, I'm sure everyone will rebound and realize what they like about the cruise industry, and voice their own opinions when things aren't right, and hopefully it will get better. Well,
I appreciate your commentary on all of these matters. it's good to get your viewpoint on this, just to let the folks know. Folks, they're not just big, pretty cruise ships. There's a lot more behind it than that. And to operate a cruise line the way these guys are, there's the right way to do it. Maybe there's the wrong way to do it. And not everyone is doing it perfectly. And that's the way it is. And people are people with respect to taking a cruise line to court or not. And, you know, some people they think they can make a quick buck by trying to sue a cruise line. Think again, not going to happen. It's a very complicated business and fascinating business. I find it incredibly fascinating. I just absolutely love all the aspects of it. And I'm sure I'll be doing this for a while yet. And I'm enjoying it. Thank you, Jim, so much for being here tonight.
Thanks, Bruce. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a great one. And
okay.
Viewers, I'll talk to you later, Jim. I'm going to shut this down. Viewers, thank you for being here with me tonight for this one-off show. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you didn't find it too boring, or I hope you did find it incredibly interesting. I find it just fascinating talking to Jim about what's going on out there. It's an amazing world. There's so much to the cruise business to follow. To the channel, I'll be back on again next Monday night at 7 o'clock for sponsor members. And thank you for sponsor members for following me. And I'll be back on at 8 o'clock next week as my back to my regular show. And we'll put some trivia on for you. And we'll have some fun with trivia next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay warm, stay healthy. And I will see you next Monday from Creston. I'll be back in Creston, British Columbia. I hope you enjoyed Mr. Stinky's company tonight. He popped in for a little bit of a visit. And you guys, in the meantime, have a pleasant evening, and we'll see you all next Monday night. Thanks, guys. Bye for now.